In the days after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, while the city was still burning and the air was still thick with smoke and ash, every bank in San Francisco did the same thing. They locked their doors. They sealed their vaults. They cited damage assessments and record verification and the need to restore order before resuming operations. And the working people of San Francisco, the Italian immigrant families of North Beach, the laborers and fishermen and small business owners who had lost everything in the earthquake and the fires that followed it, were left standing outside closed doors with nothing. No access to their savings. No way to borrow what they needed to start again. No institution willing to look at them and see anything other than risk. While that was happening, a man named Amadeo Giannini drove a fruit wagon through the rubble of the city he loved, with $80,000 in gold and cash hidden under orange crates, to the Washington Street wharf. He laid a plank across 2 barrels, and he opened for business. He had no building. He had no vault. He had no teller window, and no lobby, and no marble floors. What he had was a plank, 2 barrels, $80,000 that he had rescued from the Bank of Italy before the fires reached it, and a belief so completely at odds with every established financial institution in America that most of his peers considered it not just unusual, but dangerous. The belief that ordinary working people, people without property deeds, without stock portfolios, without the kind of collateral that respectable banks required before they would speak to you, deserved access to the same financial system that everyone else was told was available to all Americans, but in practice served almost none of them. He looked the workers and the fishermen and the immigrants who came to his plank on the Washington Street wharf directly in the eye. He asked them what they needed. He asked them how they planned to rebuild. And then he lent them the money, not against their property, against their word, against their hands, against his own judgment of the kind of people they were. What Amadeo Giannini could not have known, standing at that plank in the ruins of San Francisco in April of 1906, was that the decision he was making in that moment, the decision to stay open when every other institution had closed, to serve the people every other institution had turned away, to build something on the foundation of ordinary working Americans rather than on the foundation of the wealthy few, was going to produce the largest bank in the United States of America, not despite the plank and the barrels. Because of them, because of what they represented about who Amadeo Giannini believed banking was actually for. And what he built from that belief is a story that almost nobody in America today has ever been fully told. Before we go further into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if stories like this move you, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss what we uncover next on The Silent Fortunes. His name was Amadeo Giannini. And before we go any further into what he built from that plank on the Washington Street wharf, let us be honest about what the world around him believed in 1906. The established banking industry of early 20th century America operated on a principle so deeply embedded in institutional thinking that almost nobody questioned it. That banking was for people who already had money, that lending was for people who already had collateral, and that the working men and women who built American cities with their hands and their labor were fundamentally too risky to serve. Every major financial institution in the country had arrived at the same conclusion through the same logic, and every one of them was leaving the same people outside the same locked doors. So how does a man with a plank across 2 barrels in an earthquake-destroyed city, lending money on handshakes and character judgments, go on to build what becomes the largest bank in America? What did Amadeo Giannini understand about ordinary working people, their reliability, their loyalty, their capacity to repay a debt honored on nothing more than a man's word, that every established financial institution in the country had spent decades completely ignoring? And why? Given that what he built changed the way every single American interacts with money today, has almost nobody outside of financial history circles ever heard his name or been told his story? Those 3 questions are at the center of everything you are about to hear. And by the time you have the answers, you will never look at a closed door, institutional or personal, the same way again. Amadeo Giannini was born on May 6, 1870, in San Jose, California, the son of Italian immigrants who had come to America with the same belief that brought millions of others, that this country offered something their homeland could not, and that the work required to claim it was worth whatever it cost. His father, Luigi Giannini, was a farmer, a working man in the most literal sense, who understood the value of a dollar not as an abstraction, but as the specific measure of what a day's labor could produce and what its absence could cost. When Amadeo was 7 years old, Luigi Giannini was murdered by another man over a dispute involving a single dollar. $1. The specific cruelty of that detail, the violence of it, the smallness of the amount against the size of the loss, settled into Amadeo Giannini at an age when such things settle permanently, and it shaped everything about how he would eventually think about money, about working people, and about what it truly meant when a financial system failed the men and women who needed it most. His mother Virginia remarried a man named Lorenzo Scatena, a produce merchant in San Francisco, and Amadeo grew up working in the business, learning the rhythms of commerce from the ground up, dealing directly with the farmers and the fishermen and the immigrant families of Northern California whose labor fed the city, but whose financial lives were almost entirely unserved by the institutions that were supposed to serve them. He became a partner in the produce business while still a young man, and eventually sold his share to focus on what he had come to believe was the more fundamental problem, not how goods moved through markets, but how money moved through communities and why so much of it moved around ordinary working people rather than through them. In 1904, Amadeo Giannini founded the Bank of Italy in San Francisco's North Beach neighborhood, the heart of the Italian immigrant community he had grown up among and understood better than anyone in the established banking world ever had. The idea behind the Bank of Italy was so straightforward that it is almost impossible to explain why it was considered radical. Amadeo Giannini believed that banks should serve ordinary working people, not just the wealthy. He believed that a man's demonstrated character and his capacity to work were sufficient collateral for a loan. He believed that financial services, savings accounts, mortgages, small business loans should be accessible to the fishermen and the laborers and the small shopkeepers of North Beach, not just to the established merchants and property owners who already had the kind of assets that respectable banks required before they would speak to you. The established banking industry looked at this philosophy and saw recklessness. The working people of North Beach looked at it and saw, for the first time in their experience of American financial institutions, something that actually resembled the promise they had been told America represented. And then, in the early morning hours of April 18, 1906, the earth beneath San Francisco moved, and everything that Amadeo Giannini believed about which philosophy of banking was built on the stronger foundation was about to be tested in the most direct and devastating way imaginable. At 5:12 in the morning on April 18, 1906, an earthquake struck San Francisco with a force that the city had never experienced and would never forget. The initial tremor lasted less than a minute. What followed lasted days. Gas lines ruptured and ignited fires that spread through the wooden structures of the city with a speed that the fire department, its water mains broken by the earthquake, was almost entirely powerless to stop. When the fires were finally contained, approximately 3,000 people were dead and more than 28,000 buildings had been destroyed. Entire neighborhoods had ceased to exist. The financial district, the waterfront, the residential blocks that housed the working families of San Francisco, all of it was rubble and ash and the particular silence that follows a catastrophe too large to immediately comprehend. Amadeo Giannini did not wait for the silence. Before the fires reached the North Beach neighborhood where the Bank of Italy operated, he moved. He loaded the bank's gold and cash, approximately $80,000, into fruit wagons belonging to his stepfather's produce business and covered it with orange crates, disguising it as produce being moved through the chaos of the burning city. He transported it to his home in San Mateo, south of San Francisco, where it would be safe from the fires and from the looting that followed them. What he did next is the detail that separates Amadeo Giannini from every other banker in San Francisco in the days that followed the earthquake. Every established bank in the city assessed the damage to its buildings, cited the need to verify records and restore order, and kept its doors locked. Some remained closed for weeks, some for months. The working people who needed access to their savings, who needed to borrow money to rebuild their homes and restart their businesses, were told to wait. The system that was supposed to serve them had decided, in the moment they needed it most, that its own institutional concerns came first. Amadeo Giannini took his $80,000 back to the waterfront. He found 2 barrels in the rubble of the Washington Street wharf and laid a plank across them. And he began lending. not to established merchants with property deeds and financial statements. To the fishermen and the laborers and the small shopkeepers and the immigrant families who came to him with nothing but the specific desperation of people who had lost everything and needed a way to start again. The collateral he required was not documentation. It was a handshake. He looked each person in the eye, made his own judgment about their character and their capacity to repay, and lent them what they needed. While the established banks of San Francisco remained behind locked doors, Amadeo Giannini was already rebuilding the city one handshake at a time. What Amadeo Giannini did on the Washington Street wharf in the days after the 1906 earthquake was not a departure from his banking philosophy. It was the most direct and visible expression of it. The belief that had driven the Bank of Italy from the day he founded it in 1904, that ordinary working people were not a risk to be avoided but a community to be served, and that a bank built on their labor and their trust was stronger than one built on the assets of the wealthy few, was the same belief that put him behind a plank across two barrels while every other banker in San Francisco was behind a locked door. The earthquake did not create Amadeo Giannini's philosophy. It simply revealed, with the specific clarity that only a crisis can produce, which philosophy of banking was actually built on solid ground. And the people who came to that plank on the Washington Street wharf and received what they needed did not forget it. Loyalty built in the moment of greatest need does not fade quickly, and Amadeo Giannini understood that better than any banker of his generation. What followed the earthquake was not just recovery. It was expansion, driven by a series of specific innovations that Amadeo Giannini introduced to American banking one by one, each of them built on the same foundational belief. He pioneered branch banking, the radical idea that instead of requiring people to travel to a single downtown location to access financial services, the bank should go to the people, opening branches in the neighborhoods where they actually lived and worked. This sounds obvious today because Amadeo Giannini made it obvious. Before he did it, it was considered impractical and unnecessary. He introduced installment lending, allowing borrowers to repay loans in small regular amounts over time rather than in large lump sums, giving working people access to credit in a form that actually matched how their income arrived. Established bankers called this irresponsible. The working people who used it called it the first time a financial institution had ever offered them something designed for how their lives actually worked. He financed the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge when no other financial institution in California would commit to the project. He provided the initial financing for Walt Disney's Snow White, the first feature-length animated film in history, at a moment when the established film industry was calling it folly and predicting it would bankrupt Disney entirely. In both cases, Amadeo Giannini looked at something the established consensus had decided was too risky and saw what the established consensus always missed, not the risk of serving people others had excluded, but the extraordinary opportunity that exclusion had left waiting for anyone with the conviction to walk through it. His willingness to serve the people the system had written off was not charity. It was not sentiment. It was the most consistently sound business judgment in the history of American banking, proven not once, but over and over again across 5 decades of decisions that the conventional wisdom of his industry told him he should not make. The Bank of Italy grew, not with the explosive speed of a company built on speculation or favorable market conditions, but with the steady compounding growth of an institution that had earned the trust of communities that had never been trusted by a financial institution before. Branch by branch, neighborhood by neighborhood, Amadeo Giannini expanded the Bank of Italy across California into communities that the established banking industry had never considered worth entering, serving customers that every competitor had decided were not worth the risk. And every community the Bank of Italy entered responded the way the fishermen and laborers of San Francisco's North Beach had responded in 1904, and the way the people who came to the plank on the Washington Street wharf had responded in 1906. With the specific loyalty of people who have been excluded from something they needed and have finally found someone willing to give it to them without requiring them to be something other than what they are. By 1930, the institution Amadeo Giannini had built had grown so far beyond the boundaries of the North Beach neighborhood, where it began that the name it carried no longer reflected what it had become. The Bank of Italy was renamed Bank of America, a name that announced, without any ambiguity, The scale of what Amadeo Giannini had set out to build and the ambition that had driven every branch opening, every installment loan, every handshake on the Washington Street wharf. Bank of America grew to become the largest bank in the United States, the largest bank in a country that had told Amadeo Giannini, through the institutional consensus of his entire industry, that the people he was building it for were too risky to serve. The largest bank in America was built on the foundation that every other bank in America had dismissed. That is not irony. That is proof. And then there is the detail about Amadeo Giannini's life that reveals his character more completely than anything else in this story. When he died on June 3, 1949, his estate was valued at approximately $489,000. For the man who built the largest bank in America, that number is almost impossible to reconcile until you understand that it was not the result of financial failure or mismanagement. It was the result of a deliberate and consistent decision made throughout his life to give away virtually everything he earned beyond what his family needed to live. Amadeo Giannini believed that no man should accumulate personal wealth beyond a certain point, and that the purpose of building something large was not to enrich yourself, but to serve the people the institution existed for. He did not build Bank of America to become wealthy. He built it because he believed in what it was for, and he died having proven, in the most complete and personal way possible, that he had meant every word of it. Today, Bank of America is one of the largest financial institutions in the world, serving tens of millions of customers across the United States and internationally, managing trillions of dollars in assets, with a presence in communities from California to New York and far beyond the borders of the country whose name it carries. And every single dollar of it, every branch, every account, every loan, every transaction that passes through that institution today is traceable in a direct and unbroken line back to a plank laid across two barrels on the Washington Street wharf in the ruins of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, by a man who looked at the working people of a destroyed city and decided that what they needed was more important than what the institutional consensus said he should do. So what do we take from the life of Amadeo Giannini? There is one silent fortune in this story, and it is the one that matters most. The silent fortune in Amadeo Giannini's story is this: the people every system decides are too risky to serve are almost always the most loyal, the most reliable, and the most underestimated source of strength available to anyone willing to look past the conventional wisdom that excluded them. Amadeo Giannini did not build the largest bank in America by serving the people the system already valued. The system already had institutions for those people. He built it by serving the people the system had decided were not worth the risk: the fishermen, the laborers, the immigrant families, the small shopkeepers, the working men and women who came to a plank across two barrels with nothing but their word in their hands and their specific human need to start again. And every single one of them proved the system wrong. They repaid their loans. They saved their money. They built their businesses. They stayed loyal to the institution that had treated them as worth something at the moment when every other institution had told them they were not. If you have ever been the person a system decided was not worth the risk, if you have ever been told by an institution, an employer, an industry, or a person with authority that what you had to offer was not sufficient, that the collateral you could provide was not enough, that the risk of investing in you was too great, Amadeo Giannini's story is the most direct answer to that judgment you will ever hear. The system that excluded you was not evaluating your actual value. It was applying a formula that was never designed to find people like you. And the formula was wrong. Amadeo Giannini proved it wrong one handshake at a time, on a plank across two barrels, in the ruins of a burning city, while every other institution in San Francisco kept its doors locked and waited for order to be restored. Order was not what the people needed. Someone willing to open was. Every established bank in San Francisco kept its doors locked after the 1906 earthquake. They cited damage assessments and record verification and the need to restore institutional order before resuming operations. Their reasoning was sound. Their caution was understandable, and their names are largely forgotten. Amadeo Giannini laid a plank across two barrels on the Washington Street wharf and started lending money on handshakes to people who had nothing left but their word. That plank became the largest bank in America. The doors that stayed locked are forgotten. The plank is still standing. So here is the question I want to leave you with today. and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments below. When every established institution had its doors locked, Amadeo Giannini set up a plank and stayed open. Has there ever been a moment in your own life when you chose to stay open, to keep going, to keep serving, to keep building, when everything around you was closing? Tell me in the comments below. Because that moment, whatever it was, is the most important thing you have ever done. And Amadeo Giannini's story is proof that it was always worth it. If this story gave you something real today, subscribe to The Silent Fortunes. Because every single week we come back here and uncover another story the world forgot to tell.